How did you think the debate went? The numbers, just to kind of give the numbers for people that are watching this, the numbers came in on how many views it got. Debate ratings, only 12.8 million people watched it. 13 million less than Donald Trump's debut in 2015. Many will say a big part of that is because Trump and Tucker took a lot of views away when they did that Twitter X show together, Tucker X show together. But what was your feeling about the debate? We were right next to each other, so we saw the same thing.
Yeah, so if you look at all the punditry heading into that debate, the conventional assertion was that everybody was going to attack Governor DeSantis for the obvious reason that he's been depicted and held up forever as the only alternative to Trump. So if you're looking to move up in the polls and you believe the notion that DeSantis is the real viable alternative to Trump, you obviously want to take DeSantis down in order to replace him. None of that happened. I don't think DeSantis got attacked a single time. Not one person attacked. He was essentially ignored. He did a perfectly fine job. I think he's a very skilled speaker. He has a good message, all of that. Somehow when you put it all together, the sum is less than its parts. But I found it so notable that all of the attention instead got devoted to Vivek.
Oh, yeah.
Why? Why did they all go up there and decide to attack Vivek? Part of it, I think, is a genuine resentment. So like, imagine, you spent your career, you're like the governor, you've got elected to the Senate, you're the ambassador to the UN, you're the vice president of the United States, and some guy comes along that 4 months ago, no Americans had heard of. No one knew who he was.
Yep.
He's incredibly self-confident. Let's just use the positive sense of that term. You can call him kind of arrogant. He probably comes off that way to people who dislike him. He has an enormous amount of self-belief, and he's ahead of them all in the polls. That's why he was in that center position, right next to DeSantis, while Nikki Haley and Tim
Pence
Scott and Chris Christie are all
Mike
off to the
Pence
side.
is off to
Yeah, so a lot of it is obviously just like genuine personal resentment and anger, like there was toward Trump.
And they also have no relationship with him whatsoever.
Exactly, which is
like he's new on the scene.
And for that reason, he has no interest in creating any kind of personal favor. He loved the fact that they were attacking him. But I don't think it's just that. These are very professional politicians. They spend a lot of money on consultants. They're looking to go up onto that stage and perform strategically. They're not just there to vent whatever negative emotions they have. Obviously, there are things going on inside the polls. We see them a little bit publicly, but internally, and I've definitely heard this from lots of different people connected to various different campaigns, is that he is rising in the ways that matter much more precipitously than even is evident and visible in these polls, in the sense that people who are more politically engaged are starting to like him, which is one of the key metrics, because that then filters down to the people who are less engaged. They see him, obviously, as a greater threat to be the alternative to Trump than they even see Governor DeSantis as being, and that is amazing. And I think that what that shows is the transformational aspect we were talking about with Donald Trump. By far, the person most closely aligned with Donald Trump ideologically is Vivek. Yeah. And DeSantis is trying. DeSantis understands that there's no way to get that nomination if he's going to alienate the ideology that Trump has made the predominant ideology in the Republican Party. But Vivek is not even diluting it at all. So the fact that the only people who Republican voters seem to be willing to consider are the ones standing up and saying, I am an America first, populist, nationalist, and all of that comes with that. I'm going to wage a war on the CIA and the FBI. I want to defund the FBI. I want to deconstruct the permanent administratives. In Republican politics 10 years ago, that would have gotten you destroyed if you had uttered that unintentionally. Now, the only way to succeed is by making it a centerpiece of your campaign, which he has done. And the fact that kind of the one that even is most closely aligned with Trump ideologically is clearly starting to become the alternative to Trump shows how dominant that Trump ideology is within Republican Party politics.
Well, doesn't it come down to essentially what Pat's been talking about for months and months and months now, is that the establishment versus the anti-establishment? Like, just to give a metaphor, I just thought of this. Let's say there was a debate, but it was all the legacy media guys, right? You got Anderson Cooper there, you got Brett Baer there, you've got David Muir, you've just got Lester Holt. Typical legacy media.
Right.
And all of a sudden, center stage is Patrick Bet-David, host of the top-rated PBD podcast. And they're like, who the hell's this guy?
Well, they're going after him.
Some
easy.
tall, skinny, brown guy, whatever, with a weird last name. Not exactly, Bet-David. But they're all like, who the fuck? And he's winning. Because he's telling it like it is. He's not exactly establishment, and he's just giving it to you raw and real. And that's essentially what Vivek is doing.
But that is the key. I've heard you say this before. I completely agree with you. Even like that Rachel Maddow quote about, my being the left's whatever. Left and right, I'm not saying it doesn't matter. It does matter. There's still issues where it's a reliable indicator of where somebody falls. But by far the more important metric is, do you regard American establishment institutions of authority as fundamentally trustworthy, reliable, and benevolent, or do you see them as deceitful, malignant, and entities that need to be destroyed? That anti-pro-establishment dichotomy is by far the most important political framework for understanding where someone's politics is. And both Vivek and Trump are clearly on the anti-establishment side of that. And I don't think any of the other candidates on that stage, including Governor DeSantis, even though he makes gestures towards it because he has to, is not really a credible anti-establishment figure. And I think the Republican polling is starting to reflect that.
It's the same reason why Bernie was a fan favorite of even people on the right in 2016, because he was not establishment. Because the public distrust in institutions
and why millions and millions of Americans twice voted for President Obama and then voted for Donald Trump, which makes no sense if you see the world through a left-right prism, obviously, but makes complete sense if you see it through an anti-establishment because Obama's appeal, fraudulent though it was I'm this skinny guy with this weird last name who hasn't been in Washington and has no
and I'm not a
investment
Bush.
in Washington. Right, I'm not, I'm not a Clinton. I'm not a Clinton.
Yeah.
And
but he turned out to be
was
one,
his appeal.
basically.
Right, no, he was. It was fraudulent, of course. That was, but at least he had a credible claim to present himself as that. And you go back to Obama's 2008 campaign, and it was all about, we're going to radically change Washington.
Yeah. So Glenn, break it all down. If it's the Obama change narrative, it's the Bernie, the millionaires and billionaires. If it's the Trump, it's the Vivek. All that put together, where is America at? Where is the American populist movement at? Because there's stuff on the left, there's stuff on the right. People are just angry at what the hell's going on with the establishment. What is it? What's the common denominator?
Well, there was that Time magazine article that I'm sure you guys have seen that was very long and unintentionally revealing, that essentially said that there was the most extraordinary unified campaign on the part of establishment power centers to unite and coalesce in every single way imaginable to ensure that Biden beat Trump in 2020. And obviously, the entire media was against Donald Trump. He had every anti-incumbent obstacle, starting with COVID and the way that it destroyed businesses and shut down the United States. And he still came extremely close to winning, even by the certified results, right? Like, even if you take the certified results at its face value, he was, 44,000 votes away from changing 3 states. And that shows you 2 things. One, establishment power centers still do have a lot of power. There are still a lot of people who trust the media, even though it's far less than it was even 10 years ago. But when you add on to that the financial power of Wall Street that backed Biden overwhelmingly, Silicon Valley that did the same, they still wield a lot of power, which is why they're the establishment. And that's how they kind of pushed an adult Joe Biden over the finish line, barely though. And I think the reason why all these prosecutions are happening is because nobody is confident that Joe Biden is going to beat Donald Trump.
How can you?
Yeah. So let's look at this here, because I wanted to see what everybody was going to say, who the winner was. Trump said Vivek was the winner of the debate for obvious reasons. The Hill said Glenn Youngkin, which is kind of interesting for them to say Glenn Youngkin with, hey, let's go get Glenn, and Murdoch wants to go fund him.
From the no labels situation?
Yeah. The Guardian said Trump. WAPO said DeSantis was the winner. WAPO chose DeSantis as the winner. If we're looking at, with everything that's going on today, you think he's going to show up to the next debate September 27th at the Ronald Reagan Library? You think Trump's going to show up to that one? Or you think he still doesn't have a reason to show up?
I think it's going to depend on how the poll, to see if anyone actually gets a real boost from this debate. If DeSantis I think there was a 538 poll that quickly polled who was the winner. 29% said DeSantis, 28% said Vivek. There was that focus group assembled when CNN gets those like regular people. It's like, kind of people going on like some sort of excursion to go on a field trip to look at how the ordinary people live, and they talk to them. Vivek was the winner of that focus group. I think 11 votes got for Vivek, and I think 7 or something for Haley. So I think it's going to depend. I mean, if Trump continues to maintain a 45 to 50 point lead, notwithstanding the fact that he's not showing up, my guess is he'll continue to not show up. Why would he show up? On the other hand, Trump likes that kind of debate. He's extremely good at it. And it's possible he'll do one or two just to do them. But I just don't see anything happening at that debate that changes the fundamentals of the race. I think all it's going to do is give Vivek a much bigger boost than probably anybody else. If you look at the polling, Republicans like DeSantis. It's not like they hate DeSantis. Yeah. They like DeSantis primarily because of the credit they give him for COVID and opening up Florida. But they're just not going to abandon Trump for anybody.
Can I show you this poll real quick? Since you brought up DeSantis, I mean, look, Trump has only risen in the last 6 months, right? He went from 50 to essentially 60. Mm-hmm. Look at where DeSantis was. This is earlier this year, February, neck and neck with Trump. Dude, he's about to go below Ramaswamy. He's at 14%. Vivek's at 10%. To say that it's a disaster what's going on in the DeSantis campaign would be an understatement. He was neck and neck with Trump,
and now that's happening.
That's why you're the expert.
I think
clearly it's been a failed marketing agenda.
I think one of them is that the MAGA, the fan base, the Trump supporters, they're literally pissed off, like the majority of us are, and they're like, you know what? Crazy. It's vengeance time and it's payback, and he deserves it. Because at the end of the day, Glenn, I was thinking about you because I was talking with Tom Ellsworth, who's under the weather. We were talking about sometimes God picks people to step up. And sometimes people answer the call, some people don't. You were called upon to wake up the world, and you risked everything, as I mentioned earlier. Trump did as well. He risked it all. He didn't need to. He's a billionaire. He could sit in the middle he could be on a yacht for the rest of his life. He picked it. The real supporters, the real people behind Trump are like, you know what? Look at all the shit that came out. He was cheated, lied to the entire time. Nobody's going to be held accountable. We want him back in, and we want him to serve these 4 years and go after everybody. That's why I think. And like you said, I like DeSantis. He's cool. He's one. Pat, the whole team moved here. I moved here because of obviously Pat and him. Great guy. I would like to hang out with that. That's fine. I'll have a beer with him. But that's just showing you that decline is the people, especially with all the indictments and all this garbage. They're like, no. I want the guy that was supposed to be in there, Glenn, and I want him back, and I want him to go after everything.
Yeah, I think people are seeing that if they don't vote for Trump, if they abandon Trump, what they're essentially doing is rewarding the maneuvering and the scheming of the people they most hate.
Yes.
And on top of that, I do think, and it's hard for me to get a sense of this because honestly, it has never mattered to me, but I know it does matter in like some sort of political sense, is the reality is DeSantis is just not comfortable in those sort of settings where you're supposed to go and meet regular people. And Trump is the best at that. And I think also that DeSantis is just kind of awkward in those situations.
Big time.
And I think once people kind of took a look at that, they either lost confidence in his ability to win, or they themselves got a little bit uncomfortable with him. Trump's ability to just seem like this kind of regular guy, which again comes from the fact that he has this outer borough resentment, despite growing up with a lot of wealth and obviously living his whole life as a billionaire. He just always maintained that same. I mean, Richard Nixon had that too, actually. He hated the Eastern elite. He always felt like they were looking down their nose at him. Trump very much has that. DeSantis doesn't. He spent his, career he started off his life at Harvard and Yale. Yeah. He was in the House. He had a very kind of pro-establishment voting record while in the House. And so I think people, the more they kind of get a sense for him, they do like him, but they're just like I said, the sum is somehow less than the parts. It just doesn't all add up into something that is exciting anybody. And I think that's a big part of that drop.
Exactly.
Can you go to that poll real quick?
Yeah, and the fact that, Glenn, that Trump, his personality, that type of stage presence, now that's why people are resonating with Vivek. Because if you saw DeSantis, it was the same thing. It was everything was written. Vivek is out there talking trash and that energy. Trump opened up the roof, and now people are like, we want that. We don't want that same
Vivek
boring.
rapped, you know,
Yeah,
and he looked like reasonably uncringy doing
Exactly.
it. And, you know, I sat next to him, like, you know, as close as we're sitting. He looks you in the eye. He like has this, also, I don't know if you've seen, but like he has a wife and kids. Those kids are insanely adorable.
Oh, I love them.
His wife is very charming. Like the whole thing just comes together. And the way he speaks to you, he looks you right in the eye. He's very comfortable in his own skin. People really sense that. That's like an authenticity that can't really be trained or taught.
He's got that skill, but it's just unfortunately he's a skinny brown kid with a weird last name, and it's just not going to happen in the Republican
Well, not this
Party.
year.
Not this year, but
his future looks bright.
yeah.
How much do you put into these national polls, especially from 538? So if you just look at the popularity or unpopularity or favorable ratings for Biden and Trump, pretty similar. So the disapprove is what, Rob, punch in on that?
Well,
53%.
Yeah.
And approve is 41. So the net disapproval rating is 12%, right? So, and if you go to Trump, I think it's
bad too.
It's even.
I mean, it's worse.
Go to that. So it's 53. So it's 12. Rob, if you scroll down, you can probably find the Trump, or just go to the top.
I'm not a big poll liker.
Anyway, it's very similar to Trump. I think Trump is actually even worse. Rob, if you just go to the top, buddy, you'll find the. There it is. There it is to the right, Trump. So. All right, so just go to the very end.
Yeah.
All right, so it's what, 17?
I don't believe that poll.
So 56, 30. Point is this. There's about a 60-40
It's like an
split.
aggregation of polls.
Yeah, exactly. How much stock do you put into this? Because ultimately what this is telling me is, just like I've said before, October of 2024, it's going to be like breaking news, neck and neck. Biden, Trump. It's going to be anybody's race. You know, it's going to come down to 50,000 votes in, you know, Fulton County and in Pennsylvania and in certain parts of Detroit, what have you. Where does this break, and how much do you put in stock into these polls?
Well, I mean, it was very similar in 2016. I mean, Trump and Hillary in this kind of question were two of the most unpopular political figures to run for the presidency in the modern era. And yet Trump ended up winning by a pretty comfortable margin in terms of the Electoral College and the way that the states broke down, obviously not in the popular vote. So a lot of this matters in a very kind of limited sense. Who cares if 90% of people in California and New York hate Trump? He's going to lose those states, and it doesn't matter by what margin. Also, if you have two unpopular candidates, at the end of the day, people are going to want to know what was my life better under one or the other? And it is just the case that prior to COVID, the Trump economy was doing extremely well. The other issue is Trump was the first American president in decades not to involve the U.S. in a new war. I know people don't want to hear that. I know people, but that is an amazing fact to me that there has, you have to go back. I mean, not even Jimmy Carter. You have to like have a very broad definition in order to find one. No new wars under Donald Trump, and the economy was doing very well. And I think at the end of the day, that's what people care about the most, and that's what they should care about the most is their own self-interest and which of these presidents are going to make their lives better. And I think, you know, they don't have to like Trump. They have to like how the country was and how their lives were under a Trump presidency.
Let me ask you a very specific question. As since you're Rachel Maddow's most fearless political commentator from the left, why wouldn't you vote for Trump in 2024?
I mean, I just don't vote because I don't like attaching myself to a particular candidate because I feel like it clouds my ability to do my job as being a journalist. I think it's important. It's a kind of old traditional way of looking at things, but I think for me it matters. Like I think once you vote for a candidate, you feel a responsibility to vindicate that, even subconsciously. You know, I live in Brazil as well. I love that distance that I can maintain, you know, not just geographic, but just kind of like emotional and psychological. I think it's a very important one to maintain my independence.
When's the last time you voted?
Haven't voted since I became a journalist for exactly that reason.
Do you think most journalists should just not vote and sit these things out and just be a journalist?
I mean, I think what most journalists should do is maintain a spirit of independence. And like whether these people vote or not because of that they're obviously Democrats. And what amazes me is that there used to be a requirement that they pretend more. Now they don't pretend any longer.
Right. They're
I don't mean the op-ed page people. I mean like the actual reporters sit on Twitter all day explicitly endorsing Democratic National Committee talking points in a way that surprises me because it seems like these media outlets have an interest in maintaining that fraudulent appearance of neutrality. They've given up on that. That doesn't even exist anymore.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.